determined in an impartial, fair, and timely manner, and that any repatriation of refugee claimants is conducted in accordance with Tanzania's international human rights obligations. Thank you.
Maintenant, je donne la parole
I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Chad via Zoom. You have the floor.
Est-ce que Chad est disponible?
Is Chad available?
Oh, oui, absent. Then we go to the next speaker. It's Chile by video statement.
Madam President, we welcome the delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania and thank it for presenting its national report. We'd like to emphasise the National Action Plan to eradicate violence against women and girls 2017 to 2022, and we're also pleased to note that you're implementing the guideline to eradicate gender-based violence in secondary and higher education institutions from 2019. With a view to further pursue the respect and promotion of human rights, Chile recommend 1. Adopt urgent measures to amend the criminal code and decriminalise same-sex sexual relations. And 2. To take measures to eradicate stigmatisation, discrimination and the expulsion of pregnant girls and adolescent mothers, including from schools, and to step up efforts to ratify the Convention Against Torture and the Second Optional Protocol to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights with a view to abolishing the death penalty. We wish the United Republic of Tanzania every success in the third cycle of the UPR. Thank you very much.
下面是中国发言。Madam President, the Chinese delegation welcomes the efforts and achievements made by Tanzania in promoting and protecting human rights. We appreciate the fact that Tanzania has maintained security and stability for a long time, actively promoted sustainable economic and social development, advanced industrialization, and implemented the right to development. Tanzania has made a great effort to develop education and health services, improved transport infrastructure, made commendable achievements in promoting rural electrification, and made positive efforts to promote and protect human rights of a vulnerable group. China would like to make 2 recommendations to Tanzania. First, to continue to implement the National Development Agenda Vision 2025, Africa Agenda 2063, and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and to improve people's living standards. Second, to increase the investment in communication facilities and infrastructure construction in rural areas to promote economic and social development in rural areas. Thank you, Madam President.
Orateur suivant est le Congo.
The next speaker is Congo via Zoom.
Monsieur le Vice-Président.
Vice President, Congo bids a warm welcome to the delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania and thanks it for presenting its report. My country applauds Tanzania's efforts to promote and protect human rights, particularly by improving the living conditions of its people. With this in mind, Congo congratulates Tanzania with regard to progress achieved in the area of education thanks to the implementation of a policy to make primary and secondary education fee-free. You have also improved access to drinking water. Nevertheless, my country encourages Tanzania to step up its efforts to ensure full protection for older persons who are accused of witchcraft. Lastly, Congo would like to make the following recommendations. 1, to step up efforts to ensure that persons living with albinism can fully enjoy their rights, particularly their right to life. And 2, to effectively combat practices of female genital mutilation. We wish Tanzania every success in its UPR. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Côte d'Ivoire over Zoom. Thank you, President. Côte d'Ivoire bids a fraternal welcome to the delegation of Tanzania and thanks it for presenting its 3rd national report to the Universal Periodic Review. The Ivorian delegation congratulates Tanzania on actions taken to ensure respect for its obligations in the area of human rights, notably by adopting and implementing the first national action plans for human rights during the period 2013 to 2017. Cote d'Ivoire also encourages efforts to be made to draft a second plan which should strive to improve the human rights situation in the country. With that in mind, the Ivorian delegation would like to make the following constructive recommendations to the Tanzanian government. One, to ratify the Convention on the Status of Stateless Persons, and two, to ratify the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman and Degrading Treatment or Punishment. By way of conclusion, the Ivorian delegation wishes Tanzania every success in its review. Thank you very much.
Je vous remercie. And
thank you.
Cuba by video statement.
Thank you, President. Cuba welcomes Tanzanian delegation and thanks it for presenting its national report. In line with the country's commitment to promote and protect human rights, we've seen some encouraging results in various spheres. For example, health infrastructure has been extended, there's better access to health services, and we've seen that the coverage of education is improving. We recommend that Tanzania continue to extend health infrastructure and the scope of health services. Two, you pursue your efforts to combat violence against women and to close gender gaps. We wish Tanzania every success in its review and in implementing the recommendations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Czech Republic for a video statement.
The Czech Republic welcomes the delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania. We welcome some recent positive developments concerning freedom of media, functioning of judicial system, and empowerment of women. However, we regret that most of our previous recommendations have not yet been implemented. Thus, we once again recommend ratifying the Convention Against Torture and the optional protocol thereto. We recommend further promoting the freedom of media by ensuring the full compliance of the Media Service Bill of 2015 with the right to freedom of expression and implementing necessary legislative changes. We strongly recommend further improving the independence of the judicial system and its impartial attitude towards the LGBTI community and ceasing of criminalization of its activities. Lastly, we welcome the efforts to protect persons with albinism and recommend strengthening these efforts in order to protect persons with albinism from violence. Thank you.
Thank you. Et maintenant, je passe la parole au...
I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Democratic Republic of Congo over Zoom. Thank you, Vice President. The Democratic Republic of Congo bids a warm welcome to the delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania and thanks it for presenting its national report to the third cycle of the UPR. We congratulate you on acceding to the 2013 Marrakesh Treaty to facilitate access to published works for persons who are blind, visually impaired, or otherwise print disabled. In this context, my delegation has the following recommendations for you to finalise the ratification of the following conventions. 1. The Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman or Degrading Treatment or Punishment from 1984, and 2. The 2006 International Convention for Protecting All Persons Against Enforced Disappearance, and 3. The 1990 International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of All Migrant Workers and Members of their Families. Lastly, my delegation wishes the delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania every success in its Universal Periodic Review. I thank you very much.
Je vous remercie. And now I give the floor back to the delegation of Tanzania to address observations and comments that have been made so far. Your Excellency, the floor is to your delegation.
Mr. President, indeed, I am very much grateful to the 33 interventions that we have received so far. And we take with humility the compliments which have been made to us for the successes that we have attained in some areas in the protection and promotion of human rights, and also in the areas of concern. There are matters of which I would again reiterate the position at the right time on same-sex relations, of which our penal code decriminalizes such offenses, and there are good reasons for that, which will be later on dialogued when we continue. I would want just to point out on a few areas and emphasize. One, pregnant schoolgirls are not expelled from school. Instead, they leave the formal system of education while lactating and taking care of the babies, taking into consideration the nature of the society where we don't have enough kindergartens and areas where we can take children to. Because the children which are born from these girls also have a right of existence, a right of being brought up. However, the government of Tanzania notes that the problem is not only of schoolgirls, but also boys from pastoral societies and the urban poor. And this is why we have the complementary basic education in Tanzania, which is referred as COBET 1, which I have already said is for primary age children, but also the integrated program for out-of-school adolescents. And all of this, once they go through the formal stage, in the next stage they go back to the formal system. For example, the re-entry in education by those who dropped out because of many reasons, boys and girls, girls for pregnancy, boys for taking care of animal husbandry and the rest, is very clear. In 2019, they were those who joined the formal education system in Standard 5 after dropping in primary school. In 2019, there were 5,036 boys who rejoined again the system, and 4,219 girls, and the total was 9,255. In 2020, the number of boys who again re-entered the formal education after dropping out was 4,827, and the female students, it was 6,210, total 11,037. When you come for those who sat for exams in Standard 7 after dropping out in class 5, in 2019, there was 100,660 boys who rejoined or re-entered the school, and 1,225 girls, with a total number of 1,805. Those who dropped in ordinary level education, which means Form 4, they were able to rejoin again the formal education system in Form 5. 2019, it was 95 males, 60 female, total of 155. And 2020, it was 1,039 male and 149 girls, 288. As a result of this, Tanzania has been able to access finances from the World Bank in order to address some of these issues. And in implementing this program, this year, academic year, budget year, we are building 260 new schools. And in these, 10 are specific for girls, which means indeed there's no expulsion, but also they can re-enter the education system at the next stage. And now we have girls who have gone up to university, and some of them now are members of parliament, some of them now are professors after having stopped education because of those matters. So we take that matter very, very seriously. And on other issues, we will accordingly respond. But I want to assure all of you that measures have been taken in Tanzania when it comes to political parties to ensure that political parties operate in a manner which does not compromise the secular state of Tanzania. There's no compromise at all at the state status of the state of Tanzania. Whoever wants to bring in religious issues, ethnic issues, discriminatory issues in Tanzania, that will not be tolerated. We are a nascent nation of diverse religious beliefs, of diverse ethnicities. Once we compromise in that, we all know what happens when you compromise on the secular nature of political discourse. In that, I re-emphasize, we will not compromise on the secular nature of our state under any circumstances, because that is what has made Tanzania to be the stable Tanzania you know today. And compromising on that will not only be perilous to Tanzania, but to the region in Africa. On other matters, we will look at them and they will respond accordingly to which we can implement and which we need more time to do well. And the efforts now done by Her Excellency President Samia Suluhu Hassan is to increase investment in rural areas, rural development, rural empowerment, through empowering women and girls in rural areas. And as I said, in this financial year, the amount of investments which is being taken to empower women in Tanzania is incredible. And I want to believe it will raise the awareness of women, but also improve their status in the development of our nation. After all, they are the majority in our society. Mr. President, I have carefully listened to the interventions made, and indeed I thank all who have intervened, those who have commended in areas of which we have done well, and those who have raised concerns in areas which we need to improve more. I thank you.
I thank you for these comments. And now we will return to the list of speakers. The next speaker is Denmark by video statement.
Denmark welcomes the delegation of Tanzania. Although all sexual offences are criminalized in the penal code, we are concerned that intimate partner violence and martial rape are still not criminalized. Denmark recommends the government to enact a comprehensive law on SGBV, ensuring inclusion of indigenous women and girls and those living with disabilities. While freedom of expression has been improved by amending the Statistics Act, restrictions on civil space remain. Denmark recommends the government to amend the Non-Governmental Organizations Act, Regulation 2018, in line with international human rights standards on freedom of association and peaceful assembly. Finally, Denmark recommends the government to ratify the CAT. Allow me in this context to highlight that the Convention Against Torture Initiative stands ready to assist Tanzania in advancing on this issue if deemed helpful. We wish Tanzania a successful review. I thank you.
Next is Djibouti by video statement.
Madam President, Djibouti welcomes the high-level delegation from Tanzania and thanks it for presenting its national report. My delegation applauds measures taken by Tanzania since the last UPR to strengthen the fight against poverty, violence against women and children, and against human trafficking, particularly by adopting a strategy for growth and poverty reduction, national action plan for reducing violence against women and children, or even the national action plan to fight human trafficking. We also appreciate the government's efforts to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals thanks to its second five-year plan, which is part of the implementation of the mid-term development strategy for Tanzania 2025, as well as the National Development Strategy Tanzania 2050. We have the following recommendations. 1, to pursue efforts to ensure equal access to health services of a high quality for all citizens without discrimination, both in urban and rural areas. And 2, to continue to protect the rights of children by strengthening policies and laws to protect them, notably by responding to their education needs and by punishing attacks on their rights. Lastly, Djibouti wishes Tanzania every success in the review. Thank you very much.
I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Egypt on Zoom.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. We wish to welcome the delegation of Tanzania, and we praise the presentation of the report to the UPR and their concern to achieve the SDGs and the implementation of the development plan until 2020. Within a constructive dialogue, we wish to recommend the following: to pursue the national efforts aiming at achieving justice and pursuing all the efforts to end domestic violence. In conclusion, we wish Tanzania every success. Thank you.
Thank you. And I give the floor to the next speaker, the distinguished representative of Eswatini on Zoom.
Welcomes the delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania and notes the progress made by the United Republic of Tanzania implementing recommendations during the second cycle of the UPR. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, we recommend Tanzania to 1. Continue to increase access to birth registration for all children born
There's interference in the line. I'm sorry. It's very hard to hear the speaker.
Excuse me?
The sound quality is very poor.
Some noise which is interfering with your statement. I guess some paper.
All right.
Could you?
Should I start afresh? Is it clear now?
Yes, please restart your statement.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Vice President. The Kingdom of Eswatini warmly welcomes the delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania and notes the progress made by the United Republic of Tanzania in implementing recommendations during the second cycle of the UPR. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, Eswatini recommends to Tanzania, 1, to continue to increase access to birth registration for all children born in Tanzania, including migrants, refugees, thus avoiding statelessness. 2, to continue strengthening its laws that curb human trafficking and people smuggling, including the use of awareness-raising programs and campaigns on trafficking, particularly in rural areas, border areas, and areas of poverty. 3, to continue efforts to ensure that all children, especially children living with albinism, have access to education and healthcare services. The Kingdom of Eswatini wishes the United Republic of Tanzania success in its third cycle of the UPR. I thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you, Madam. And now I give the floor to Fiji by video statement.
Thank you, President. Fiji commends Tanzania for the progress made between 2015 and 2020 to ensure access to clean and safe potable water. We offer the following recommendations. 1, ensure the meaningful participation of women, children, persons with disabilities, and local communities in the development and implementation of climate change and disaster risk reduction frameworks. 2, take the necessary steps to combat discrimination and violence against women and children, and on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. 3, ensure that Section 154 of the Penal Code does not criminalize or is not interpreted in a manner that criminalizes same-sex relations. We wish Tanzania a very successful review. Thank you.
Thank you. And the next speaker is Finland by video statement.
Finland welcomes the engagement of Tanzania in the UPR process and wishes to recommend the following. Firstly, to ensure freedom of assembly and expression, to enable political and civic space so that political parties, media and civil society organizations can operate safely and fully exercise their rights. Secondly, to adopt legislative and policy measures to combat all forms of discrimination and violence against women and girls, including addressing the issue of child marriage and ensuring access to education for pregnant school girls and young mothers. Thirdly, to clarify land rights and safeguard indigenous culture, including traditional livelihoods, especially for indigenous peoples, and adopt positive measures to protect them. I thank you.
I now give the floor to France via Zoom. Thank you, Mr. Vice President. France thanks the Tanzania for presenting its national report and takes due note of the presentation made of it. We would encourage the authorities of Tanzania to implement the following recommendations: to abolish the death penalty and ratify the second optional protocol to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, aiming at abolishing the death penalty, to strengthen work to combat ill treatment, to ratify the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons Against Enforced Disappearances, to take all necessary measures to combat discrimination and violence against women, including against domestic violence and sexual violence, to guarantee freedom of expression, assembly and peaceful association, as well as the freedom of the press, first of all by releasing the political journalists who've been detained, to guarantee that human rights defenders can freely carry out their activities without risks of reprisals. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Gabon. Madam, you have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Vice President. The delegation of Gabon welcomes the delegation of Tanzania and congratulates it on presenting its national report. We support the positive measures undertaken by the Tanzanian authorities to promote the rights of vulnerable groups, more specifically women, children, older persons, and people living with a disability or suffering from albinism. We encourage specifically the strengthening of the legal and institutional framework to combat all forms of violence, including female genital mutilation and violence related to harmful practices such as sorcery or accusations of sorcery, with respect in particular to people who are suffering from albinism or who are older. The delegation of Gabon as a member of the Troika encourages all of these areas of progress and recommends the following. First, that it continue its efforts to combat adverse practices linked to sorcery and accusations of sorcery. Second, that it strengthen the legislative framework to combat violence against persons suffering from albinism. And third, that it step up the effort to eradicate female genital mutilation. We wish all success to Tanzania in this review. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam.
Speaker is Georgia by video statement.
Georgia welcomes and thanks the delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania for the presentation of national report. We appreciate the progress made in relation to the situation of disabled persons, including the efforts made in relation to adaptation of the legislative measures. We welcome the fact that Commission for Human Rights and Good Governance had been accredited with A status in accordance with the Paris Principles. Georgia also lauds government for the progress it had been made at attaining universal primary education. Herewith, Georgia would like to recommend to Tanzania, first, to continue efforts aimed at implementation of the National Plan of Action on Violence Against Women and Children, including elimination of the gender-based violence. Second, to continue efforts aimed at improvements in tackling corruption through initiatives that includes the adaptation of legislative and regulatory frameworks. We wish the delegation of Tanzania a successful UPR. I thank you.
Thank you. And the next speaker is Germany by video statement.
Germany welcomes the delegation of the government of Tanzania. Germany commends Tanzania for its efforts in strengthening the rights of women and girls in Tanzania and for ratifying the protocol of the African Charter on People with Disability in Africa. However, Germany remains concerned about the situation of media representatives, political parties, and freedom of expression. Germany therefore recommends to first, continue to combat the phenomenon of child early and forced marriage by amending the relevant legislation accordingly. Second, review legislation, including the Cybercrimes Act, to ensure that freedom of the press, as well as freedom of expression and opinion, is protected. Third, review the legislation on automatic denial of bail for enumerated offences, for instance, economic crimes, and particularly money laundering, to align its laws to recognize regional and international law and human rights standards. Fourth, consider revising inheritance laws in order to ensure equal inheritance rights for women with regard to their husbands and parents. Thank you, Madam President.
I now give the floor to Ghana for a video statement.
Thank you, Madam President. Ghana welcomes the delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania to the UPR Working Group, and we thank them for their report. My delegation acknowledges the establishment of the National Anti-Trafficking Action Plan of 2018-2021 and the development of the National Strategy on the Elimination of Child Labor 2018-2022 to reduce child labor. We further commend the government for efforts to ensure women empowerment in all sectors and welcome the establishment of the Women Participation Unit in the Ministry of Works and Transport. Ghana has the following recommendations. One, continue to reinforce relevant measures to ensure the elimination of violence against women, including prohibition of all harmful practices such as female genital mutilation. Two, intensify its efforts to ratify outstanding international instruments. Of note is the UN Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment and its optional protocol. And three, ensure full respect for the rights to freedom of expression by removing all obstacles to the rights to freedom of expression and media freedom. We wish Tanzania a successful review outcome. I thank you.
Thank you. And the next speaker is Iceland, by video statement.
I thank you, President. Iceland welcomes the delegation of Tanzania and its national report. Iceland makes the following recommendations. 1. Ratify the second optional protocol to the ICCPR, abolish the death penalty, and commute existing death sentences to a proportionate punishment in line with international human rights standard. 2. Enforce the relevant legislation criminalizing the practice of female genital mutilation. 3. Decriminalize consensual sexual relations between adults of the same sex. 4. Respect the right to a confidentiality and dignity of LGBTI+ persons by banning invasive and demeaning procedures disguised as evidence gathering, such as anal examination. I wish Tanzania all success for its review. I thank you.
The next speaker is India with a video statement.
India warmly welcomes the delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania and thanks them for the comprehensive presentation. We congratulate Tanzania for the successful conduct of the 6th general elections in October 2020 and also for graduating to the lower middle income country in 2020. We welcome the adoption of various legislative measures for promotion and protection of human rights as well as focus on efficiency of governance. We assure the government of Tanzania of our unreserved support in their objective of improving the human rights situation in their country, and in the spirit of cooperation and dialogue, India recommends the following to Tanzania. 1. Take steps to implement the initiatives taken against female genital mutilation and towards protection of people with albinism. 2. Take adequate measures to increase the ICT-related infrastructure to advance the quality of education, in particular for the women and girls. 3. Continue to take necessary measures to improve the clean drinking water and sanitation facilities to the rural areas. We wish Tanzania all success in its current and future endeavors. I thank you, Madam President.
I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Indonesia on Zoom.
Thank you, Vice President. Indonesia thanks the delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania for their report. Indonesia welcomes efforts by Tanzania to further guarantee gender equality, including through the Legal Aid Act of 2017 and the Zanzibar Legal Aid Act of 2018. To further improve progress in the promotion and protection of human rights in Tanzania, Indonesia would like to recommend the following. 1. To take further steps towards the ratification of the UN Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment and Punishment. 2. To take further measures in implementing the CEDAW, in particular in curbing discrimination and violence against women. And 3. To further ensure that people have access to vital information on the prevention of COVID-19. Indonesia wishes the delegation of Tanzania a successful review. I thank you.
The next speaker is Iraq by video statement.
شكرا للسيد الرئيس. يرحب وفد جمهورية العراق برئيس وأعضاء.
Thank you, President. Iraq would like to extend a welcome to the delegation and members of the delegation for Tanzania, and we welcome the presentation of this national report. We note with satisfaction the measures taken to implement the recommendations of the second UPR cycle, such as considering the possibility of acceding to international human rights instruments and measures adopted to bring about constitutional reform, and we support the adoption of new plans and new laws, in particular to combat violent extremism. As part of the interactive, constructive dialogue, the delegation of Iraq would like to present the two following recommendations. First, that efforts be continued to submit reports to treaty bodies, and second, to continue efforts to ratify the Convention to Combat Torture. By way of conclusion, the delegation of Iraq wishes the delegation of Tanzania all success in the course of this review. Thank you very much.
And the next speaker is Ireland with a video statement.
Ireland warmly welcomes the delegation of Tanzania and thanks it for its presentation today. Ireland acknowledges Tanzania's efforts to promote gender equality domestically, including in relation to the prevention of violence against women and children. Ireland notes progress under the National Plan of Action to End Violence Against Women and Children 2017 to 2022. We welcome the ongoing review of the Law of Marriage Act and relevant legislation. Ireland welcomes the commitments by the Government of Tanzania to initiate political dialogue with opposition parties. Ireland recommends that Tanzania 1. Amend the Law of Marriage 1971 and other legislation to reflect the Court of Appeal decision on the minimum age of marriage, and 2. Ensure a safe and enabling environment for political parties, civil society organisations and human rights defenders to exercise their legitimate activities effectively and independently. We wish Tanzania every success in this UPR cycle. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Italy on Zoom.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank the delegation of Tanzania for today's presentation. Italy welcomes the effort carried out to combat violence against women and children, including the National Plan of Action 2017-2022, and commend the adoption of the National Anti-FGM Strategy and of its implementation plan 2019-2022. Italy offers Tanzania the following recommendations. Take further measures to eradicate all forms of discrimination and violence against women and girls, including child, early and forced marriages, and female genital mutilations. Ensure that the right to freedom of expression is duly respected and intensify the efforts to protect the rights of persons belonging to religious minorities. Decriminalize consensual same-sex relations and combat discrimination against LGBTI persons. Adopt a de jure moratorium of capital executions and ratify the second optional protocol to the ICCPR aiming at the abolition of the death penalty. We wish Tanzania a successful review. I thank you.
Thank you, Madam. And the next speaker is Japan with a video statement.
Thank you. Japan warmly welcomes the delegation of Tanzania to this session. Japan highly appreciates the fact that the first female president of Tanzania, Her Excellency Samia Suluhu Hassan, has been promoting women's participation in society. At the same time, Japan is aware that Tanzania is faced with challenges in achieving gender equality and ensuring the rights of persons with disabilities. Japan would like to make two recommendations. First, take additional steps to ensure women's rights in matters of inheritance, succession, and land rights. And second, improve accessibility of persons with disabilities to public places, including public buildings and public transport services. We wish the delegation of Tanzania every success in the review. I thank you.
I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kenya on Zoom.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Kenya congratulates Tanzania on the comprehensive national report and for the progress made in promoting and protecting human rights for its citizens since the second cycle of UPR. Notably, we commend Tanzania for establishing the High Court Corruption and Economic Crimes Division in 2017, eliminating attacks and killings of persons with albinism, and lastly, acceding to the Marrakesh Treaty in April 2020. In the constructive spirit, Kenya makes the following two recommendations. One, enact a law on the protection of older persons in society in mainland Tanzania. And two, continue with efforts including existing programs to eliminate child labor in the country. Kenya wishes the delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania a very successful UPR review. I thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you, and I give the floor to Latvia for a video statement.
Thank you, President. Latvia welcomes the delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania to the UPR Working Group and thanks for presenting its national report. We would like to recommend to the government of Tanzania 1. To establish a moratorium on death penalty with a view to its eventual abolition and to consider ratifying the second optional protocol of the ICCPR. 2. To promote and protect the right to freedom of expression and media freedom, as well as safety of journalists. 3. To conduct full and impartial investigations of all threats and attacks against and killings of journalists, civil society actors, and human rights defenders, and hold the perpetrators accountable. We would also like to reiterate the following recommendation from the previous UPR cycle: to consider extending standing invitation to all special procedures mandate holders of the Human Rights Council. Latvia wishes the delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania success in the review. I thank you.
I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Lebanon on Zoom.
Mr. Vice President, Lebanon welcomes the delegation of Tanzania and thanks them for their national report and presentation. Lebanon appreciates the constructive engagement of Tanzania with the human rights mechanism and all the efforts made during the reporting period to promote human rights. Furthermore, Lebanon welcomes the general elections held in 2020 and all the work done to improve the normative framework. In a spirit of constructive dialogue, we would like to recommend: 1. Continue the efforts undertaken to eliminate child labor. 2. Take more measures to implement more effectively the National Action Plan to end violence against women and children. Finally, we wish to Tanzania a successful review. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you. And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Lesotho on Zoom.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Lesotho welcomes the delegation of Tanzania to the working group. We take note of the steps taken by Tanzania in various areas to promote and protect human rights of its people. We applaud Tanzania for fulfilling their reporting obligations under CRPD, CRC, and CEDAW. Further, we commend them for addressing child labor by developing a national strategy on elimination of child labor of 2018 to 2022. At this point, we wish to make the following recommendations for consideration by Tanzania. 1, to continue efforts to combat discrimination and non-equality against women, especially on issues related to marriage and inheritance. 2, to strengthen measures to safeguard health rights of women, particularly on issues relating to prenatal and postnatal care of pregnant women. Finally, we wish Tanzania every success with this UPR cycle. Thank you.
I thank you, and I give the floor to Libya for a video statement.
Thank you, President. We would like to welcome the delegation from Tanzania, and we thank it for its cooperation with the UPR mechanism. Recently, Tanzania has introduced a national plan to reduce violence against women by 50%. We'd recommend that Tanzania continue with these efforts to halt all forms of discrimination against women and to pursue its efforts undertaken with respect to complying with international human rights norms and adopting a range of measures in the justice sphere. In conclusion, we wish Tanzania all success during this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Je donne la parole au
I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Madagascar via Zoom.
Is Madagascar in the room? I understand this is not the case. Then we move to the next speaker, Malawi.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Malawi welcomes the United Republic of Tanzania to this review, and we applaud Tanzania for the policy and legislative actions that have been implemented to protect rights of children, such as the ongoing process to amend the Law of Marriage Act to increase the legal age. We also note the progress Tanzania has made to reduce poverty, combat corruption, and improve infrastructure to anchor a firm foundation for development. Malawi makes the following recommendations to Tanzania. 1, complete the reforms necessary to raise the minimum age, legal age of marriage for boys and girls to 18, and to sensitize people on the importance of protecting the rights of all children. 2, continue efforts to reduce poverty, especially by enhancing access to quality education and skills development, as well as improving conditions for farming small businesses, and investors to thrive. 3. Ratify the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment. We wish Tanzania a very successful review. Thank you.
Thank you. And the next speaker is Malaysia by video statement.
Malaysia welcomes the delegation of Tanzania and thanks them for the presentation of their national report. Malaysia congratulates Tanzania for the conduct of its general elections in October 2020. We welcome the strengthening of the national human rights institutions and commended Tanzania for taking positive steps to safeguard women's empowerment. In the spirit of constructive engagement, Malaysia offers the following recommendations. First, continue strengthening the enforcement of laws prohibiting violence against women and girls. Second, take concrete measures to implement the National Anti-Trafficking in Persons Plan of Action 2018-2021 with a view to combating trafficking in persons. And third, continue to provide adequate resources and funding for fundamental human rights issues, including access to healthcare and education. Malaysia wishes Tanzania a successful review. Thank you.
Thank you. And I am going back to the delegation of Madagascar and ask them if they still wish to take the floor on Zoom. Apparently this is not the case, and we move to the next speaker, the Maldives, on Zoom.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. The Maldives welcomes the high-level delegation from the United Republic of Tanzania to this third cycle review and thank them for their presentation today. The Maldives congratulates the United Republic of Tanzania on graduating from the low-income country to lower middle-income country in 2020. We hope the momentum is maintained to advance from the middle income threshold and progress towards attaining of the National Development Agenda Vision 2025, Africa Agenda 2063, and the Sustainable Development Goals 2030, while mainstreaming the promotion and protection of human rights. In constructive spirit, the Maldives presents the following two recommendations to the United Republic of Tanzania. 1. Extend a standing invitation to special procedure mandate holders of the Human Rights Council. 2. Expedite the adoption of the second National Human Rights Action Plan to implement the recommendations of the Universal Periodic Review. We wish the United Republic of Tanzania a successful review. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you. Et je donne la parole au
I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Mali via Zoom. Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Mali thanks the delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania for presenting its third national report under the UPR process. My delegation congratulates the Tanzanian government for the major efforts made to implement the recommendations accepted during the second UPR cycle and salutes the work that has allowed the Human Rights Commission and the Human Rights and Good Governance Commission to be assigned A status in accordance with the Paris Principles. My delegation appreciates the establishment of safety and security committees for persons with albinism and councils for older persons throughout the country. These structures will make it possible to ensure better protection of persons with albinism and older persons who are suspected of practicing sorcery, while helping to get rid of old-fashioned practices. In a constructive spirit, we would recommend that Tanzania ratify the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, and Degrading Treatments and Punishments. We wish all success to Tanzania. Thank you very much.
Floor to Mauritania for a video statement.
The delegation of Mauritania would like to welcome the delegation of Tanzania and congratulates it on presenting its national report. Mauritania congratulates Tanzania for the adoption of a national action plan for human rights for the period 2018-2022. More specifically, the implementation of the national strategy to eliminate child labor for the same period. We also welcome the efforts made in promoting and protecting the rights of people with albinism and recommend to this effect that Tanzania implement a national action plan for albinos, which has been pending since 2020. In conclusion, Mauritania encourages the United Republic of Tanzania to continue its efforts to strengthen promotion and protection of human rights and wishes it every success in this present review. Thank you.
On the list is Mauritius with a video statement.
The Mauritius Delegation would like to extend a very warm welcome to the high-level delegation of the sister country of Tanzania during this third cycle of the UPR. Mauritius applauds the efforts of the United Republic of Tanzania for increasing the capacity of law enforcement officers to combat violence against women and children. In a sisterly spirit, we recommend that Tanzania implement measures to provide non-discriminatory universal health coverage, and that Tanzania consider ratifying the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment. We wish Tanzania a very successful review. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And the next speaker is Mexico with a video statement.
We'd like to thank the delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania for presenting their report. We recognize their efforts made to bring about a significant reduction in poverty and to make progress in combating corruption by strengthening governmental and legislative bodies in this respect, with a view to strengthening human rights policies in the United Republic of Tanzania. Mexico respectfully would recommend the following. First, that it approve the implementation of the National Human Rights Action Plan, which was created in 2017. Second, that it guarantee access, rather, to harmonize the regulation with respect to the minimum age of marriage and prohibit child early unions and marriages. That it revised national legislation to alleviate the causes of practices of persecution against persons with albinism, and fifthly, that it intensify work done to investigate the causes of sexual abuse of children and to eliminate the practice of female genital mutilation. We wish all success to the United Republic of Tanzania in this UPR cycle.
Floor to the distinguished representative of Mongolia on Zoom.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Mongolia welcomes the delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania and thanks the delegation for presenting its third national report. My delegation recognizes the major progresses that the United Republic of Tanzania has achieved since the second UPR cycle. Mongolia appreciates the efforts of the country to make progress in implementing the commitments on the Sustainable Development Goals to fight violence against women and children, to counter discrimination, and to eliminate child labor. Particularly, Mongolia commends the United Republic of Tanzania for implementing the Secondary Education Quality Improvement Program with the objective of empowering girls through secondary education. We would like to offer the following two recommendations for the country's timely consideration. First, to ratify the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment, and two, to ratify the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance. Mongolia wishes the delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania all the best for its review. I thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you. And now I give the floor to Montenegro for a video statement.
Montenegro welcomes that the United Republic of Tanzania is a party to the majority of the core international human rights treaties and that it has reiterated its pledge to also accede to the conventions related to stateless persons and statelessness. The emphasis should remain on their more effective implementation, including bridging a backlog in its reporting obligations to the relevant treaty bodies. We also recognize the continued efforts to address violence against women and children, domestic violence, rights of elderly, child labor. We deeply deplore that the criminalization of same-sex relations has led to increased discrimination, vulnerability, and social marginalization of LGBT persons, negatively impacting their access to social services. Montenegro reiterates its call to the country to ratify the second optional protocol to the ICCPR and to extend standing invitation to special special procedures mandate holders. Montenegro recommends to the United Republic of Tanzania to ensure that the laws governing the rights to freedom of peaceful assembly are fully in line with the provisions of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and to adopt the national strategy and action plan for prevention of radicalization and violent extremism. We wish the United Republic of Tanzania a successful UPR.
I now call on the distinguished representative of Morocco by Zoom. Thank you, Mr. Vice President. My delegation welcomes the Tanzanian delegation and thanks them for the detailed presentation of their report. We would like to welcome the government of Tanzania for the efforts it's made to promote and protect human rights since it went through the second cycle in 2016. My country is also pleased with at the accession of Tanzania to the Marrakesh Treaty, designed to ensure that people who are blind, visually impaired, who have difficulty reading printed texts can get access to information. My delegation also takes note of the continued implementation of the National Action Plan to eliminate violence against women and children. In a participatory and constructive spirit, my delegation would like to propose the following recommendations. 1. Consolidated international human rights commitments following up on the ratification of the Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading punishment and treatment. And second, strengthen education measures and develop educational infrastructure. We would like to wish the delegation of Tanzania every success in its UPR. Thank you.
Speaker is Mozambique with a video statement.
And thank the distinguished delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania for the submission of their country's comprehensive report to the third cycle of the UPR. Tanzania should be commended for its efforts in the implementation of the recommendations it has accepted in the second cycle of the UPR. Mozambique offered the following recommendations to Tanzania. 1. To speed up implementation of the National Plan of Action to End Violence Against Women and Children. 2. To continue to enhance its efforts to prevent child labor. 3. To continue to engage with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights and other UN institutions for technical assistance and support and capacity building in human and people's rights matters. To conclude, Madam President, we wish the United Republic of Tanzania every success in the present UPR exercise. I thank you, Madam President.
Next is Namibia with a video statement.
Thank you, Madam President. Namibia warmly welcomes the esteemed delegation from the sisterly United Republic of Tanzania and thank them for preparing our comprehensive national report, as well as for the additional information provided today. The measures taken by Tanzania during the period under review clearly demonstrates our commitment to promote and protect human rights. As a country that prides itself in advocating for the rights of women and children, Namibia particularly welcomes the establishment by Tanzania of women and children protection committees across the country as part of its efforts to address violence against women and children. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, we make the following recommendations for consideration by Tanzania. 1. Ratify the Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment or punishment. And 2. Strengthen planning, budgeting, and institutional mechanisms at the subnational and national levels to ensure effective implementation of the National Action Plan to end violence against women and children. We wish the delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania a successful review. I thank you, Madam President.
The next speaker is Nepal by video statement.
Madam President, Nepal welcomes the delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania to the third cycle of UPR and thanks them for the presentation of the report. We congratulate the United Republic of Tanzania for graduating to a lower middle income country in 2020. We take note of the efforts of URT in eliminating the child labor, including through the implementation of National Strategy on Elimination of Child Labor 2018 to 2022. The progress made in universal birth registration and in access to clean and safe drinking water is noteworthy. We also take note of the implementation of the National Plan of Action to end violence against women and children and wish for its effective implementation. While wishing the United Republic of Tanzania a successful review, we recommend the following for their consideration. 1. Continue measures to prevent trafficking in persons. 2. Continue its efforts towards implementing the social protection policies contributing to poverty reduction. Thank you.
I give the floor to the next speaker, Netherlands, for a video statement.
The Kingdom of the Netherlands thanks the delegation of Tanzania. The Netherlands commends the Tanzanian government on the adoption of the National Action Plan on Violence Against Women and Children and the recent appointments of women in high positions. We are, however, concerned by the fact that Tanzania has fallen 53 places on the 2020 World Press Freedom Index and recommend Tanzania, first, to repeal or amend national legislation that restricts civil society, like human rights defenders and journalists, from exercising their rights and fundamental freedoms without fear for scrutiny and reprisals, including the three relevant acts so that it complies with international standards. And secondly, to strengthen the legal protection of individuals belonging to the most vulnerable groups, among which sexual minorities and women, and ensure prevention and investigation of all forms of violence, including domestic and sexual violence and female genital mutilation. The Netherlands wishes Tanzania much success with the follow-up of all recommendations.
I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Nigeria on Zoom.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Nigeria warmly welcomes the delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania to the presentation of the country's report and commends its efforts to national, regional, and international human rights obligations. We applaud the government of Tanzania for successfully implementing the first National Human Rights Action Plan and note with satisfaction efforts put in place to reinforce its institutional frameworks to promote and protect the rights and fundamental freedoms of the people of Tanzania. While acknowledging the genuine efforts and commitments of the government of Tanzania to promote and protect the fundamental rights of its people, we wish to recommend the need to 1. Sustain efforts and commitment in protecting the rights of women, children, and people with disabilities, and 2. To seek international cooperation and technical assistance and capacity building in the field of human rights. Finally, we wish Tanzania a very successful review. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you, and I give the floor to Norway for a video statement.
Norway welcomes the government of Tanzania's National Action Plan on Violence Against Women and Children, as well as the progress made towards finalizing the text of the National Human Rights Action Plan. Norway recommends that Tanzania 1. Takes urgent steps to amend legislation to outlaw all forms of child marriage, safeguards women's rights to sexual and reproductive health, and ends violence against women and children. 2. Protect children's rights to access to health and education by abolishing corporal punishment in schools. 3. Fully respects and protects the rights to freedom of assembly and freedom of expression and enshrines in the law the right to a safe and enabling environment for human rights defenders, journalists, and media workers. 4. Approves and implements reforms to strengthen the independence of the judiciary and to strengthen citizens' access to justice and legal aid. 5. Abolishes the death penalty in all circumstances. I thank you.
Thank you, and now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Pakistan on Zoom.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. We welcome and thank the delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania for the comprehensive presentation of its third UPR report. We commend Tanzania's cooperation with human rights mechanisms. Tanzania has taken multiple legislative and administrative steps to promote enjoyment of human rights since its last UPR. Despite resource constraints, we appreciate Tanzania's commitment to comply with its human rights obligation. Strengthening the Commission for Human Rights and promoting its compliance with the Paris Principle with Status A are noteworthy developments. We also welcome the implementation of plans to combat violence against women and children, reduce child labor, and protect rights of persons with disabilities. We recommend Tanzania to expedite ongoing efforts aimed at early finalization of second National Human Rights Plan, continue with steps to implement third National Development Plan for achieving progress towards SDGs, and continue its cooperation with Human Rights Council and its mechanism, including special procedures. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you. And the next speaker is the Philippines with a video statement.
Thank you, Chair. The Philippines warmly welcomes the delegation of Tanzania and thanks it for its national report. We welcome Tanzania's constructive approach to the UPR session and acknowledges the efforts made by the government in the areas of poverty reduction and access to adequate standard of living. In a constructive spirit, the Philippines presents the following recommendations for consideration by Tanzania. 1. Continue to implement inclusive education programs, including alternative learning opportunities for vulnerable groups. 2. Strengthen gender mainstreaming in national and local development planning and ensure the participation of women and other relevant stakeholders in the process. And 3. Take further proactive measures to prevent and address trafficking in persons and reduce the vulnerability of groups that are most at risk. We wish Tanzania every success in this review cycle. Thank you, Chair.
Next is Poland with a video statement.
Participation in the UPR process. We commend Tanzania on its efforts to decrease the number of reported attacks against persons with albinism. We believe more needs to be done in order to address root causes of such attacks. We recommend to Tanzania to submit reports on the implementation of core international human rights treaties that Tanzania is a party to and to adhere or ratify the remaining ones. Take steps to promptly and effectively investigate and provide information on cases of arbitrary arrest and detention of political opponents, activists, protesters and dissenting journalists. Introduce amendments to the laws with a view to guarantee the right to education and to introduce 12 years of free primary and secondary education, of which 9 years were compulsory, and at least 1 year of free and compulsory pre-primary education, especially for girls and children with disabilities. We express concerns about restrictions on the exercise of the rights to freedom of expression and of association and the right of peaceful assembly, as well as with regard to the public access to information held by public authorities. I thank you.
The next speaker is Portugal with a video statement.
Chairperson, Portugal welcomes the delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania and notes with appreciation the increase of levels of investment in education for all, as well as the efforts made to combat human rights violations, abuses, and discrimination against persons with albinism through the increase of cooperation with all the stakeholders. Portugal recommends that Tanzania continue to strengthen its efforts to fight discrimination and violence and to eliminate human rights abuses against persons with albinism, fully abolish the death penalty in all circumstances, and ratify the second optional protocol of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Take concrete measures to tackle stigma and discrimination against persons affected by leprosy and their families, to ensure that they have timely and adequate access to health services and that they can enjoy their rights to education and to work without discrimination in line with the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Thank you.
Next on the list is the Republic of Korea with a video statement.
Thank you, Madam President. The Republic of Korea warmly welcomes a delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania to its third cycle of the UPR. We welcome Tanzania's commitment to promoting and protecting human rights, in particular with respect to the rights of the child, by improving children's access to education. We also acknowledge Tanzania's efforts to combat violence against women through the adoption of the National Plan of Action to End Violence Against Women and Children. In a constructive spirit, the Republic of Korea would like to present the following recommendations. First, continue efforts to ratify the Convention Against Torture. Second, create and maintain a safe and conducive environment where all political parties and civil society organizations can exercise their rights to freedom of peaceful assembly and of political participation without fear of reprisal. And third, step up efforts on the legislative front to combat and punish all forms of violence and discrimination against women and girls, including domestic violence, and take further measures to eliminate female genital mutilation. We wish Tanzania a successful review. I thank you.
Thank you. And the next speaker on the list is the Russian Federation with a video statement.
Thank you very much. We welcome the delegation of Tanzania and thank it for its report. We note progress in legal protection since the last UPR cycle. We support the continued efforts of the national authorities to strengthen national capacity in promoting and protecting human rights. We note the efforts of the government to reduce poverty and to promote socioeconomic development. In connection with the remaining difficulties in the sphere of legal protection, the Russian Federation would make the following recommendations. 1. Ensure protection in legislation and in practice for vulnerable strata of the population, such as women, children, people with disabilities, the elderly, and ethnic minorities. 2. To continue to adopt measures to correct the situation in the work of courts and the penal system. Thank you.
Maintenant, je donne la parole.
I now call on the distinguished representative of Rwanda by Zoom.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Rwanda warmly welcomes the high-level delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania, our brotherly neighbor, to the third cycle of the UPR, and thank them for their informative and comprehensive report. We welcome the progress made by Tanzania since the second UPR cycle, including numerous normative and institutional measures to protect and promote human rights. Rwanda commends Tanzania for the introduction of mobile court services aimed at strengthening access to justice. We also commend Tanzania for free education policy for all children at primary and secondary levels of education. Rwanda recommends the following. 1, to ratify the Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. 2, to continue efforts to address all types of attacks against persons with albinism. 3, to continue efforts to combat all forms of discrimination against violence against women. We wish Tanzania a very successful review. I thank you.
Thank you.
I now call on the next speaker, the distinguished representative of Senegal, on Zoom.
Merci.
Thank you very much, sir. Senegal warmly welcomes the delegation of Tanzania and thanks it for presenting its national report. We congratulate the government for its development strategy up to 2025 and its second 5-year national development plan. We would like to make the following recommendations. Ensure that persons with albinism are given programs against poverty and special programs, and implement the recommendations accepted during its previous cycle on legislation to protect elderly persons. In conclusion, we wish Tanzania success in its UPR cycle. Thank you. Thank you, Madam.
Is Serbia with a video statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Republic of Serbia welcomes the participation of the delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania at the UPR session and thanks for presenting the national report. Serbia appreciates greatly the level of commitment of Tanzania to the UPR process. We welcome in particular its dedication to the human trafficking issue and in this context the adoption of the National Anti-Trafficking Action Plan of 2018. We would like to recommend to Tanzania to continue the fight against all forms of discrimination against women. Serbia wishes Tanzania a successful review process. Thank you.
I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sierra Leone on Zoom.
Mr. Vice President, Sierra Leone warmly welcomes the delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania to the third cycle UPR and thanks it for the presentation of the national report. My delegation commends the government for developing the National Human Rights Action Plan, Judiciary Strategic Plan, the National Plan of Action on Violence Against Women and Children, and the Legal Aid Act of 2017. In a constructive spirit, Sierra Leone recommends the following. 1, establish a moratorium on executions with a view to abolishing the death penalty. 2, ratify and accede to CAT and ICPPED. And 3, consider to request technical assistance with a view to submitting overdue reports to the committee of the ICESCR, CEDAW, and CRPD. 4, enhance efforts to combat all forms of gender-based violence against women, including domestic and sexual violence. And 5, enhance national infrastructure for the effective implementation of the National Human Rights Action Plan. We wish the Republic of Tanzania every success with this UPR cycle. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you, and I give the floor to Slovenia for a video statement.
Excellencies,
Slovenia wishes to commend the delegation of Tanzania for their national report, its presentation today, and their commitment to the UPR process. We would like to recommend to Tanzania 1. To amend the Law of Marriage Act from 1971 to set the minimum age of marriage to 18 for both boys and girls. 2. To review laws and policies to ensure that girls who fall pregnant whilst at school, are married, or young mothers can re-enter the formal education system. 3. To amend the Media Services Act of 2016 to comply with international standards. We commend Tanzania for important achievements reached in the field of human rights in the recent months, including on media freedom and right to health. We commend Tanzania also for concrete activities such as sensitization on the rights of persons with albinism, as well as amending the Education Act. At the same time, we would like to call on Tanzania to strengthen implementation of its own constitution, as well as relevant international treaties. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is the distinguished representative of South Africa on Zoom.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. South Africa welcomes the Honorable Professor Kabudi, Minister of Constitutional and Legal Affairs, and the distinguished delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania to this UPR session. My delegation welcomes the government's efforts to facilitate access to justice through the enactment of the Legal Aid Act of 2017 and the decision in February 2021 that adopted Swahili as a legal language. In order to ensure progress in promoting and protecting human rights, South Africa wishes to respectfully recommend that United Republic of Tanzania, 1, continue to strengthen measures in combating violence against women and girls and fully implement the National Action Plan of Violence Against Women and Children. 2, enhance measures to prevent discrimination against all vulnerable groups, including all persons living with HIV and persons from the LGBTQI community. And 3, ratify all outstanding international human rights treaties it has committed to. South Africa wishes the United Republic of Tanzania a successful review. I thank you.
Thank you. And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of South Sudan on Zoom.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. The Republic of South Sudan welcomes the delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania and thank them for the national report. My delegation congratulates Tanzanians' efforts for the improvement of the human rights situation in the country. This report signals the positive engagement of the Tanzania with the international human rights mechanism. South Sudan recommends the following. 1, recommend implementation of the third National 5-year Development Plan in line with the Development Vision 2025, the SDGs 2030, and the African Agenda 2063 in respect of the human and people's rights. 2, redoubling efforts to resolve the disparity in accessing water services in urban and rural areas. We wish Tanzania all the best and successful review. I thank you.
Thank you. And I give the floor to Spain for a video statement.
Spain welcomes the delegation of Tanzania. We applaud the progress made in combating female genital mutilation. However, given the worrying levels of violence against women and children, we'd recommend that the country allocate sufficient resources to the National Action Plan to end violence against women and children, and so as to thus strengthen the work to combat child and forced marriages. We are alarmed about setbacks in the area of civil freedoms and political rights and recommend that the country guarantee freedom of assembly, association, expression, and the press of all members of all political parties, communication media, and civil society organizations through reforming the computer crime law and the law on communications media. Spain regrets the persecution and discrimination suffered by LGBTI people and recommend that there be decriminalization of consensual sexual relations between adults of the same sex. We recommend that the country consider abolishing the death penalty in all cases and circumstances and ratifying the second optional protocol to the ICCPR. Thank you.
I now give the floor to the next speaker, Sri Lanka, for a video statement.
Madam President, Sri Lanka welcomes the delegation of Tanzania and appreciates the presentation made.
We commend the ratification by Tanzania of the Marrakesh Treaty, the enactment of national laws, and amendments to guarantee gender equality. We also appreciate Tanzania's efforts in eradicating child labor through the development of a national strategy on the elimination of child labor with comprehensive coordination and collaboration mechanisms. We recognize Tanzania's remarkable achievements in facilitating women's participation in public affairs, including all arms of government, and the provision of free primary and secondary education to children. While recognizing the significant progress already achieved in a constructive spirit, Sri Lanka recommends that Tanzania continues efforts to increase school enrollments and enhance access to education, continues to promote access to justice for all through increased provision and coverage of legal aid, further advances the right to health through the allocation of resources to an improvement of infrastructure in the health sector. We wish Tanzania success in its UPR engagement. Thank you.
And the next speaker is the State of Palestine with a video statement.
Thank you, Madam President. The State of Palestine welcomes the delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania to the third cycle of the UPR, and we thank them for the presentation of their national report. We commend the government's commitment to promote and protect human rights, including the steps taken in implementing the Tanzania Development Vision 2025. And we also welcome the ongoing efforts in improving education, including through implementing the Secondary Education Quality Improvement Program with the objective of empowering girls. In this regard, the State of Palestine wishes to make the following recommendations to the United Republic of Tanzania. 1. To continue its efforts with regard to education and to adopt policies to enhance the quality of education and ensure inclusion in education for girls and children with disabilities. 2. To extend a standing invitation to special procedure mechanisms. 3. To continue to adhere to more international human rights conventions. We wish Tanzania a successful review. I thank you.
The next speaker is Sweden by video statement.
Madam President, Sweden acknowledges that Tanzania has ratified many important international conventions on human rights, both within the United Nations and the African Union. However, serious concerns remain over the lack of an independent judiciary, the limitations to conduct free and fair elections, and the restrictions on media and the freedoms of expression, assembly, and association. Sweden would like to make the following recommendations. 1. Ensure access to justice, including by addressing the use of non-bailable offenses, targeting politicians, businessmen, journalists, and human rights defenders, and ensure it complies with due process standards. 2. Enable future free, fair, and transparent elections by undertaking political and electoral reforms, including the implementation of the recommendations issued in the final report of the EU Election Observation Mission to Tanzania of 2015. 3. Ensure through dialogue and technical support that the different laws and regulations governing the media sector, for example, Cybercrimes Act 2015, Media Services Act 2016, Access to Information Act 2016, Electronic and Postal Communications Regulations 2020, are in full compliance with human rights, including freedom of expression. I thank you.
Je donne la parole à la Suisse.
I give the floor to Switzerland for a pre-recorded statement. My delegation extends a welcome to the delegation of Tanzania. Switzerland commends the fresh momentum that has been seen in the area of human rights under the new government and recalls the importance of making this tangible as soon as possible through continuing reforms. In this context, Switzerland would like to make the following recommendations to the authorities of Tanzania. First, that it abolish the death penalty and commute all death sentences to alternative punishment. Second, that it ratify the Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading punishments or treatments. And third, that it protect freedom of expression, freedom of peaceful assembly, and freedom of association, that it adapt the laws limiting these freedoms to international standards, and combat impunity for attacks targeting journalists, human rights defenders, and peaceful political actors in accordance with Target 16.10 of the SDGs. Fourth, that the country repeal customary laws which undermine women's land ownership rights, such as Order GN Number 436/1963 of Local Customary Law Declaration Number 4, and strengthen institutions dealing with land administration. Thank you.
And I'll give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Syrian Arab Republic on Zoom.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
We welcome the delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania and thank the delegation for the presentation on the development in the normative and institutional framework for the protection and promotion of human rights, as well as on the challenges and obstacles that Tanzania continues to address in cooperation with national, regional, and international partners. Tanzania has made continued efforts to ensure effective enjoyment of the rights to safe drinking water and the right to health, which are reflected in a package of plans and programs that resulted in increasing the access to the basic services related to the implementation of these rights. We recommend the following: continue to implement national policies and programs aimed at empowering persons with disabilities. Second, continue to implement the national legal framework for the protection of natural resources and their effective use in the context of realizing the right to development. We wish Tanzania every success in the national efforts to promote and protect human rights. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you, Madam. And I give the floor to Thailand for a video statement.
And welcome the delegation of United Republic of Tanzania to the third UPR cycle. We are pleased to learn that the government National 5-Year Development Plan is in line with the SDGs and encourage the integration of gender dimension in implementing the Tanzania Development Vision 2025. While commending positive development in gender-related areas, such as the adoption of National Plan of Action to end violence against women and children, and the criminalization of female genital mutilation, Thailand notes that the incident of gender-based violence continue to exist. We therefore recommend the United Republic of Tanzania to undertake further measures to prevent domestic violence and marital rape and ensure that all victims receive necessary assistance. Thailand also recommends that the United Republic of Tanzania accelerate the adoption of the overdue Second National Human Rights Action Plan 2018-2022 and implement it with a view to mainstream human rights in different policy and programs. I thank you.
Thank you. And the next speaker on the list is the distinguished representative of Timor-Leste on Zoom.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Timor-Leste warmly welcomes the delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania and thanks them for the presentation of the national report. We take positive note of the steps taken by the government of Tanzania to improve human rights in its territory. We note with appreciation that the Commission for Human Rights and Good Governance of Tanzania has been accredited with A status in accordance with the Paris Principles, and that Tanzania has conducted several initiatives to tackle corruption, including adopting a Public Leadership Code of Ethics Act. While welcoming the measures adopted by the government of Tanzania to protect persons with albinism, Timor-Leste wishes to recommend the United Republic of Tanzania: 1. To ensure that persons with albinism are covered by the anti-poverty programs; 2. To strengthen community policing and the role of security committees in each village with the view of promoting the safety of persons with albinism; and 3. To take further steps to ensure the respect of the rights of freedom of expression and a peaceful assembly. Timor-Leste wishes the United Republic of Tanzania a successful UPR outcome. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you.
The next speaker on my list is Togo with a video recording, a video message. Madam President, Togo extends a warm welcome to the delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania and congratulates it on presenting its national report, which sets out the variety of measures adopted by the government to give effect to the recommendations accepted during the last review. Togo encourages Tanzania to be steadfast in its efforts to ensure better enjoyment of human rights in the country and would submit the following recommendations. First, that it intensify action undertaken as part of the work to combat discrimination against persons with albinism, particularly ensuring that these people benefit from programs to fight poverty through special measures. Second, that it take the necessary measures to allow young girls who are pregnant to have access to education without suffering from discrimination in accordance with national and international human rights obligations. In conclusion, the Togolese delegation wishes a successful UPR to Tanzania and all success in implementing the recommendations that are accepted. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you.
Je donne la parole.
I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Madagascar via Zoom. I would invite Madagascar to take the floor. Thank you very much. Mr. President. Madagascar thanks the United Republic of Tanzania for its report under this current UPR cycle. Madagascar applauds the ongoing effort made by Tanzania over the last 5 years to protect and promote human rights, particularly concerning the measure undertaken by the former president in 2020, alleviating sentences ranging from the death penalty to life imprisonment. In this respect, Madagascar urges that Tanzania ratify the second optional protocol to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and that it abolish the death penalty, replacing it by fair, proportionate penalties that are aligned with international human rights norms. Thus, Madagascar recommends that Tanzania adopt a formal moratorium on executions, looking forward to abolishing the death penalty, and wishes it all success in its commitments to the protection and promotion of human rights. Thank you. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, that was the last speaker on today's list of speakers.
To the Honorable Professor Kabudi, Minister for Constitutional and Legal Affairs, to address observations and comments and to make his final remarks. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Mr. Vice President, I thank you for your leadership, and let me also take this occasion to thank member states for their contributions to our national report. It is a great honor that a number of countries, and according to my list, 95, have contributed their views and comments to our submission. We appreciate your views, which have been transparent, supporting, and will guide us towards improving our efforts in order to fully adhere to our human rights obligation. So far, it has certainly been a fruitful deliberation. I will not try to answer and respond to all the 95 contributions, but highlights just a very few issues that might be pertinent at this juncture. One, I would want to say that Tanzania falls under the Anglo-Saxon common law tradition, which means judicial decisions are also part of law. And if you look at the corpus of the decisions of the courts in Tanzania on human rights, they are robust, dynamic, and they have also been trendsetters in the Commonwealth. If you read the law reports of the Commonwealth on human rights jurisprudence, Tanzania contributes a lot. And the decisions of the court actually have improved dramatically the situation of human rights. So when we look at the laws and other programs, we also need to look at the decisions of the courts in Tanzania. For example, under the Constitution of Tanzania, nobody is supposed to be treated like a convict, which means there's presumption of innocence. And the state is required to prove beyond reasonable doubt of any criminal offense which it profiles against a person in court. This includes people who are involved or alleged to be involved in same-sex relations. And we have a very interesting decision by the High Court of Tanzania in the case of Mwana Hamis Abdallah versus Hamis and the Republic in 1986 Tanzania Law Reports of 265, where the court clearly said the onus of proof of same-sex relations, which are prohibited by the law in Tanzania, is strictly on the part of the state to prove beyond reasonable doubt that the offense was actually committed. On the question of abolition of death penalty, as we have stated, in the last 27 years, there have been no execution of death penalty in Tanzania. However, the matter was taken to court up to the level of the Court of Appeal in the case of Mbushu versus Dominic Mnoroji and another. This is the 1995 Tanzania Law Reports, which ruled that death penalty did not violate Article 13 sub-Article 6E of the Constitution of the Republic of Tanzania, which prohibits torture or inhuman or death. Now is the whole question of enjoyment of freedoms and rights in Tanzania. They are enshrined in our Constitution, but no right or freedom is absolute. So Article 30 sub-Article 2 of our Constitution provides limitations to the enjoyment of freedoms and rights enshrined in the Constitution. And the Court of Appeal has gone far to define the kind of restrictions which are acceptable in the interest of all of you, it is very clear that these are on matters of public health, on matters of public morality, on matters of public safety, on matters of public peace, on matters of, as I said, maintaining a secular state in Tanzania. And this is clearly shown in the case of Kukutia Ole Pumbuni versus Attorney General, which is a 1993 Tanzanian reports case of 159, where it says limitations to enjoyment of our freedoms and rights should not be arbitrary and they should be proportional. So if you look at that, there is actually safeguards within the Constitution to make that everybody enjoys freedoms. However, as I've said, no one is above the law. On amendments to the Political Parties Act as well as the NGO Act, many issues have been ignored which actually are in that right. One, the amendments was made in the Political Parties Act and the NGO Act in order to ensure transparency and accountability of financial matters, taking into account that we are living now in a very precarious world where if you're not careful, finances to extreme violent elements can go through that process. So it applies to all political parties, including the one which is now governing the country and the opposition parties, to lay bare all their finances to ensure that there's no infiltration of funds which will go and finance extreme. But another thing was to ingrain in all political parties the secular nature of political affairs in Tanzania. But another one was to include women in all levels of leadership. There were political parties where women were not visible in their leadership, but also to inculcate the nature of intra-party democratic elections after every 5 years. So there are areas which have been improved in those areas. On the question of freedom of expression and the freedom of media, people ignore that. Journalists in Tanzania, many of them in the private sector, had no salaries, had no contract of employment, had no social security. And the law there now imposes obligations to private media owners and the state media owners to give journalists contracts of employment to ensure they have social security, but also protect them from other kind of lack of security in their employment. There are areas to improve, but those were the pertinent questions which were addressed by those laws in Tanzania in matters. On question of access to land on women, we have done tremendous. I would want to point out that actually many people are overwhelmed with the fact that in Tanzania we have two family systems. 80% are patrilineal, which means are patriarchal societies, and the 20% are matrilineal, which means matriarchal percent. In the matrilineal system, the question of land, access to land is not an issue. But we have enacted the Village Land Act, where women are given equal access to land, be it in general land or in village land. And for the first time in our Village Land Act, quorum for village land councils can only be attained if the women are in attendance. If women are not in attendance, although the quorum has been met by the attendance of men, the meeting will not be considered to have been taken place. So there are many areas which indeed we have made very big progress. And I wanted to point out that actually in Tanzania, no one has been persecuted because of his political belief, his ideology, his religion, and any kind of formation. In the last 60 years, we have made big progress. But as I said, no country is perfect, and for sure, the next 60 years we would want to improve more. And Tanzania is a child of the UN. We are a League of Nations mandate territory, we are a trusted of the United Nations, and for us, multilateralism and all normative principles of the UN matter a lot to Tanzania. As I said earlier, we are committed and value the importance of the adherence to human rights that benefit the governance of our country. We further wish to reiterate the commitment of the United Republic of Tanzania to the work of the Human Rights Council and to the Universal Periodic Review process. And we are looking forward to come again to the fourth review of UPR. I convey once again the appreciation of the United Republic of Tanzania to the Troika and to the UPR Secretariat for all the assistance we received. And more to you, Mr. Vice President, for ably chairing this meeting. Indeed, I thank you.
I thank His Excellency and the delegation of Tanzania for the presentation and participation in this review. The report of the review will be prepared by the members of the Troika, namely the representatives of Bangladesh, Gabon, and the Russian Federation. In accordance with the procedure implemented since 2015, the recommendations section is scheduled for distribution on the 9th of November, Tuesday, at 12:30 p.m. and will be adopted on the same day as from 2:30 p.m. The full report, including the summary section, will be circulated by mail on Friday, the 19th of November 2021. This brings us to the end of our meeting. We will reconvene on Monday at 9 a.m. for the review of Eswatini. Speaking time will be 1 minute and 25 seconds for all. Inscribed speakers who wish to withdraw from the list are kindly invited to inform the Secretariat at the latest 30 minutes before the start of the review. I hereby close the 8th meeting of the 39th UPR Working Group session.